a particular website, and you're going to have particular readers, and if they haven't seen that ad, they're still going to want to be able to understand what it is you're saying.
Just with the examples of what you said.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
And if we wanted to say provide a selection of print ads for them to choose from, could we attach that to the task sheet?
Yeah.
As part of the task?
You might dictate their use of one particular ad and let them choose the other, for example. And in that case, because it's a task sheet, you wouldn't probably dictate the TV ad, because you can't embed it in a paper copy. You could give them a URL, I suppose.
But you could do, for example, provide them with, if you were talking about representations of gender in media, you could provide them with 2 femininity ones and 2 masculinity ones, and then they can choose that and choose the TV ad separately.
Yeah. You do want them to be able to find some sources for themselves. I think that's particularly important. But that's just a personal philosophy. Where in the standards elaborations of the Australian curriculum does it say the students select? I don't know. I would have to go back and check that. I'm sure it'll be in there somewhere, but I just off the top of my head. So you can see what I did then. I went straight back to the curriculum to see what exactly do students have to do? Is this just my personal philosophy, or is it grounded in something concrete, like a curriculum document that everyone is bound by? So there is definitely flexibility there.
If you're using that flexibility, would you argue that it's providing support for
Yes.
yours or kids' learners? Like, could you argue that in your rationale?
Yes, you can. Problem is, you want to argue it well, because too much choice is overwhelming for low-level kids.
Yeah.
So you just need to straddle that line.
Yeah.
So you say differentiation is provided through choice in this way, this way, this way, this way, but it's not too overwhelming for students because of this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
If you've used a number of adverts in the teaching and you give them the option to use ads that we have explored, is that also limiting it? So feel free to use any of the ads that we discussed in class.
Yeah. That really raises an interesting question there in terms of familiar text and unfamiliar text. Like a lot of syllabuses, I think it's even in the Australian curriculum actually. I need to check that in the standards elaborations where students are required to work with unfamiliar texts and familiar texts. So familiar texts are those that they have had prior experience with and being taught in class. Unfamiliar texts are the ones that you haven't actually deconstructed with them.
Wouldn't that be better for them to just have unfamiliar, because then you're actually seeing that they understood?
That's true, but then that is a problem for those
It
ignores
becomes
differentiation, so it ignores other students' needs.
Because it's an option, you can use some
Yeah.
of the text that
Yes.
we have explored in class. Because one of the things I thought is that if the context is completely different,
That's true.
although they're using the
Yeah.
same advert,
That's
the
true.
context and the
Representation.
theme will be in a different
Good
way. So they can.
That's what you say in your rationale. I'll go, oh yeah.
Okay,
I
cool.
get that. Yeah, that's still transferring learning
Yeah.
from one thing to another. I know that we didn't allow our students to work with ads that we had deconstructed in class. But again, I'd have to go back to the minutiae. You know, the photo of my husband drilling into the keyhole there? I'd go back to the minutiae, the detail, and just see exactly what the parameters are around that. And of course, you just map them across the entire year too. So you've got, even if they do have to access unfamiliar text at some point, it doesn't have to be this particular task, it might be another task.
With the sample A response, are you going to be checking them to see that they actually sample A response, or are you just going to see that we've actually justified that we think it is not a sample A response?
It's both, really.
Okay, cool.
If it's a standard
That's
C.
such a good read through so many of those.
Standard A.
There's not
If-
many acquisitions.
If a student, I think it's about 30 or something.
Is there? Externals as well.
Oh. If a student says this is a standard A and it's a standard C, then there are issues.
Okay. Okay.
It means they haven't understood what discerning means, which means when they go out there, they're not going to be reliable markers, which is one of our principles of reliability. So,
But that's good because we need to know. Yeah, yeah.
Just a quick question. So, like with language features for a literary
blog, are they typical language features like in English that we could
Yeah.
be marking them in accordance to?
So language features in a blog, and this is,
We're not necessarily doing a literary blog though.
No.
No.
it has to be it has to be a quality blog, not a
You
really.
can use first person because that's.
You
the
can use
structure of
first
a blog.
person for a blog.
You can use
Yeah.
all the things that they
Yeah.
do, like headline,
Yeah.
lead.
So if it's
Shorter
So if
paragraphs,
it's a
more
literary
informal
blog,
words.
Look at you telling me what the properties are
I'm
of a
just
blog.
checking, I'm
I
just checking.
like it.
I'm just checking.
It means you've done some research. That's what that means. Sorry?
So with the literary blogs, though,
Literary.
that's what this was.
Yeah.
Does it
Literary.
have to be?
Well, what I'm saying is it has to be a quality blog. It can't just be that really low level, trashy kind of blog where
Could be in
people.
between, like, like a mixture of both, right?
Yeah.
Semi-formal.
Yes, it can be semi-formal, but the analysis has to be there. You can actually be really chatty
Yeah.
and intellectual and come across as intellectual and intelligent, and still use some of that language that is less formal. It's more of a like the intellectual rigor is there, but you're surrounding the analysis with accessible language.
Yeah.
For an example, might be
Like asking questions, like posing questions and stuff. Or,
yes, but not too many. Not
yeah,
too many.
but like
Yeah.
using sort of like you or I or we or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like sort of thing.
And I'm generally opposed to first person, but in a blog, absolutely totally appropriate. I don't even like first person in a narrative. I like third person. But that's me. I can't honestly stand there and say to a student, don't you write in first person. That's
So,
not fair. 'Cause
What
that's
if
just
the
my
stu-
thing.
So if a student was writing something like this, and then they using like advertisement as the word in their introduction and their analytical part, but then when they can they use the word ad
Yeah.
to make it more
If,
conversational?
if you are going to do that, just signal to me that you know what you're doing, and at the end of the after the word advertisement in your introduction, just put ad in brackets so that
Oh,
you know
okay.
from here on in you're going to be talking ad.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, a blog, an online blog on a website could very well shorten ad and not think twice about it
Like,
because it's vernacular.
Is that then a language feature? Like is appropriate
It is
slang a language
Yeah.
feature type?
as long as it's not too
Yeah, like-
too low. Shortening words, you know,
No,
saying
not like
situations
that, but
in a
more like if you're saying
situation.
advertisement 20 times in a blog.
Yeah, defo. Leslie, sorry.
Not like that, but I was saying like if you're saying advertisement 20 times in a blog, like people could read it and be like, oh, let's call it an ad.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
true. And also, that would be an example of where you'd look at your written expression and say, well, can I rearrange this sentence so I'm not using the word ad
Yeah, yeah.
again? You know, you can use a pronoun like it instead of
Yeah.
at, for example. And by rearranging your words, it'll often sound shorter and punchier. Don't be afraid of short sentences in a blog, like fragmented sentences, but don't overuse them. You know, you're walking that. You want to sound intelligent. You want to sound knowledgeable. You want to sound like you know how to analyse and evaluate. Evaluate is in there. I know it's in the standards elaborations. It caught me by surprise the other week when I was there. I went, wow. And that's why it's so important to look at these standards elaborations regularly, because you don't see everything at first glance, second glance, third glance. But oh, that's very sneaky having that evaluation in there. You've got to make sure it's on your task sheet. Otherwise, you shouldn't be assessing them on it. Okay, so this is a really easy ad to analyse, I think, to break down, because you've got a lot of words. Let your instinct take over. Look at the leopard print.
Medium fox.
Yes. And I can't even read that, but this says something like, make your wildest dreams come alive, surrender to the sensual and something your
Release.
most
And release your most
and
passionate
release,
self.
yeah.
Oh,
Live by impulse is a scent that will live
Last.
long after the adventure. So we've got almost Tarzan's Jane there, don't we? So there's so much stuff you can do with that. And of course, we've got the male being objectified. Look at him. He's serene. Again, he's in control of his environment. Man's in control of his environment here. Even in those ads before the man's in control, I mean, he is certainly the prey, but he's still relishing the fact that he's got control over these women's emotions because they want him so desperately. Don't forget colours, use of blue. windswept hair, tousled bedroom look, suggestions of nakedness, lots of skin, seaside, we've got blues, again you've got the perfume bottle on the right, look into that. Make sure you look at the position of objects, again she's looking at the camera, looking very calm, sensuous, elegant, perched on a rock. Have a look at what that might symbolise, and so on. Break, if you've got the table, break it down, go through the stages and you'll see stuff come to life that you would never have thought possible. It's really satisfying. Now this is interesting, do you dare? Now this is very sexual, because you've got her looking at you, inviting you in, that's two women, and you've got a male in the background. Oh, that's creepy. So there are lots of things you can do with that. Do you dare? Okay, bang, now we're into the curriculum. So, how does your task satisfy these requirements? So I've just put some screen grabs here. I want to remind you the Australian curriculum is central. You can get a lot of information for each year level. In English Year 9, this is in relation to thinking about your rationale and decisions that you make. In English in Year 9, competencies and skills are these. I think it's a really nice snapshot. It focuses you in on whether your task actually enables that or encourages students to do that. That's exactly what we've just been doing. That's what we've been doing. We've condemned some of those representations. We have endorsed some of them, but we are evaluating and we're making a judgment about. Analysing and evaluating text, explore and explain the combinations of language and visual choices. That's exactly what we did. We combined the words with the images and made sense of that. Very easy to find. And then, so that's this one here, knowledge and understanding. Is this one here. Purpose, audience, and structures of different types of text. Understand that authors innovate with text structures. So every ad is a text structure. And like I said, nothing is there by chance. It's all very deliberate to manipulate the audience to buy that product. And it's filling our heads with stuff about what women should be and what men should be. What society should be. What we should value. And understanding that authors innovate the text structures and language for specific purposes and effects. So this is just to show you another place in the Australian curriculum where a lot of very good information is for us to access. So validity. Content validity. These are on your task sheet. What content descriptor and achievement standards are most relevant to the task?
Do we put that on the task sheet, like actual content descriptors maybe? It says on our task that we've got to include the
You need to make sure
content descriptors.
that they're in the task. And you are doing that if you're using the correct standards of elaborations, you're using the correct cognitions, and so on. So these content descriptors and the achievement standards work together. That's why QCAA went to all that trouble to create standards of elaborations, because without that documentation, every teacher in every Queensland school had to trawl through the Australian curriculum all the time. So that's why they were created.
Just like sometimes you're using the words from.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Because the content descriptors, what I'm saying is QCAA supposedly did all that for us in those standards of elaborations.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. So you're not literally copying and pasting the content descriptor, but you're using the language features.
You're using the achievement standards,
Yeah.
receptive, productive, and you're using the QCAA standards of elaborations. Technically, if you've done that, then you're doing all this anyway, because QCAA did all the hard work for us, mapped it, and gave us the standards of elaborations to use for Queensland. So the document is Australian Curriculum in Queensland, and that's the link I put on Edmodo. That was the link. And in that document, I really strongly suggest every single person read that document, because it goes through some of this background, but it also gives you the lengths and the conditions. So 800 words, 3 to 5 minutes for each year level. And you'll find that you will be using it when you get out to schools, because you might be working in a department where the word count is 1,000 words, and then year 9's you think, oh, no, I no, that's not right, I can't remember what it was. You go to the QCAA website, you pull up that document, you can go to your head of department and say, well, actually, the recommended word length is this is excessive. You know, so it's a way of checking the way things are happening as well. But you'll be talking about, just as I said in the very first 10 minutes or so, this is content validity. Is your content valid? And it is valid. I keep referring you to the standards elaborations and those achievement standards. What general capabilities should also be considered? So if you look at the general capabilities in the Australian curriculum, you're probably going to cover large swath of them. So just type in general capabilities Australian curriculum. If you need to use that, remember you're limited by word count. You don't really have a lot. So again, you're going to have to make discerning choices about what you talk about. That's just something for you to do. It's just to get your head around what content validity is. And I've already talked about learning intentions in the context of standards elaborations. Content validity, what might be authentic assessment experience, we talked about that earlier. What does the literature of the discipline recommend as important big ideas and relevant skills? So when you're talking, these are your references, your sources, your research. What do the experts in the field of English say about the importance of deconstructing an ad? Plenty of stuff out there about how important it is. Have a look at critical literacy. There are lots of people who've talked about critical literacy and how our students need to be taught to not just accept all those messages that they're receiving, but to consciously accept and reject. In other words, to negotiate meaning with the text. Not just accept it as truth, but to say, okay, I accept that version of masculinity, but I reject that version. Even in the one text itself. So they are actively negotiating their own values in line with the values they're being told to accept. They're constantly challenging and actively engaging. So that's content validity. Consequential validity. What type of feedback or scaffolding would be needed for students to succeed? And that's in your tasks, in your template. I've given you a scaffolding field. Consequential validity. Look at this. How can this task prepare students for possible futures? Hello, that's the English classroom. We're discussing essence of humanity. It's the best subject in the world. We get to talk about all that really cool stuff every lesson. How does the task acknowledge diversity of student experiences? Well, that's something all of you have asked questions about that. The question about cultural capital earlier shows a sensitivity to this. The diversity of student experiences. Are you enabling everyone to access this quality learning? What recommendations for timing, schedule or presentation modes have you considered to support differentiated student needs? So you've got some students without laptops. I'm going to make sure everyone's got access to equipment.
We just talk about that in the rationale.
Yeah.
Yeah, just say like.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a comment on the task sheet if you want to. Use of laptops, use of school laptops available. What considerations does the literature recommend for supporting student success? So again, this is your reading and researching. So, and let that guide you as well. Consult those experts and see if they're actually matching what I'm telling you and what you're thinking and what the Australian curriculum tells you. And constructability. How will you show that you've considered an appropriate scope and scale of the task? We have talked about that quite a lot. Don't ask students to do too much because it'll be very superficial. 4 ads, for example, in 800 words is ridiculous. You're going with 2 ads. But you can still break scope and scale if you're asking students to address multiple themes in the 2 ads. So be careful. Test is if you can't do it in 800 words, students aren't going to be able to do it in 800 words, which means there's probably an issue with scope and scale. So look at the options you're creating for your task statement and use that as a test.
Do you reference the conditions with that then, the one that you put on Edmodo to say that like if this says this, that you should do this for this, do you know what I mean? Like you should only do 600 words for this much, or?
I mean, you would say you could say in your rationale, scope and scale is appropriate because, and scope and scale is married to conditions. Has to be. In year 8 it's 800 words, say. In year 11 it's going to be 1,000 words.
Yeah.
In year 12 it's going to be 1,200 words.
Yeah, so you'd say like it's you know, scope and scale because it says in the conditions that year 9 they do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you never talk about scope and scale without talking about conditions, because that's how you know.
Yeah.
They can't, they don't live apart from one another. Students have to be able to do standard A in that 800 words. They have to be able to do demonstrate standard E in that 800 words as well, cutting for everyone. How will you enable the teaching team to make reliable decisions about the quality of the work? You know the answers to that, and we've done it to death. What's the answer to that? We talked about it just earlier.
Have your contextualized criteria.
Contextualised criteria. Yep, authenticity. Make sure your standards elaborations are clear. Clearer they are. I think I told you that when I was looking after writing assessment for teams of teachers, initially there was confusion about what the actual criteria sheets were saying, what they're actually assessing. So I went back and I changed all the standards elaborations to be contextualised and itemised with bullet points, and then everyone understood. Teachers are coming up to me and saying, I'm not really sure what this means, and yet they're marking student work. So if that happens to you, if you are given a rubric at school and you don't really understand what it means, you're well within your rights to go and say, what exactly does this mean? You now are familiar with the QCAA standards elaboration, so you know what they should look like, sound like, feel like. And if they're different to that, ask yourself, are the changes to this reasonable or not? And 2, go and ask for some clarification so that you are marking consistently with the other teachers in the team. Otherwise, they'll give it all back to you and they'll say, that's not an A, it's a B. You go, I don't understand why that's an A or a B. Well, you should have come to me and asked me in the first place. Clarify. How well do the various elements of the task align with one another? Alignment is everything. You don't want students to choose 2 ads that they can't do anything with, that they can't join together in a thesis statement, which is what I talked about before. So your task statement, your scaffolding, how are they working together to enable students to be successful? So they're the questions, and we refer to these in our rationale. Again, look at the design brief you've been given and the standards elaborations. And you know where they are now, that's them. That's them. That's them. Whenever I say Australian Curriculum Achievement Standards, this is exactly what pops up into my brain. I can see it, the formatting and everything. And when I say standards elaborations, well, as soon as I say it, images of those standards elaborations pop into my head. And then you simply choose, etc. So, final reminders. Use the required cognitions but in a way that is accessible to all students. Don't throw them all at students in one foul sentence in your task field. Do it in a discerning way so that it's accessible to even your low-level students. So, use them logically and with precision to help them be successfully complete the task. So I would always put each analyse and evaluate. They would be very high up in my task statement. Might even be the first words that I use in my task statement. Because that's the guts, that's the whole purpose. The purpose is to analyse and explain, delete, explain, analyse how the ads are positioning audiences.
And compare.
And compare.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not evaluate.
Yes. Well, go back to your standards elaborations and see if that pesky little evaluate jumps off the page at you. Because you're going to want to make sure that it's in your task statement somewhere. You might say analyse and evaluate. You might not, but go back and have a look, see if you can see it there.
So interpret.
Unless I'm mistaken. Yeah, interpret. I wouldn't, and this is where you need to be discriminating. You need to understand the Bloom's taxonomy of the hierarchy of cognitions. If interpret is swallowed up by analyse and evaluate, you don't need to put it there. Because because it's dumb. How do you analyse without interpreting first? I don't think you can. If you're analysing, you're doing more than explaining, so you would never say explain and analyse, because analyse subsumes explains. Explain is right down here. You can't analyse without explaining, so you don't need to put both there. Explaining is defunct. It's null and void. So, students are lazy. I shouldn't say that. Students can be lazy and don't like reading a lot of stuff. That's why you privilege those really important cognitions, like analyse, evaluate, and so on. And you use them logically with precision. So what do I mean by that? I mean, when it comes to some of the other cognitions like organise, sequence, structure, you can probably put some of those in the you must field, or you put some of them in scaffolding. You're not going to, what I'm trying to say is you're not going to go to standards elaborations and pull out, let's say there are 9 cognitions there, I don't know how many there are, and throw all 9 cognitions in the task statement. That's way too much. That's not equity, that's not making the task accessible. So just put them in a logical way, that's all. That's what I just talked about. Rationale, argue about how your assessment links to, etc. Argue about how these standard elaborations in your rationale, why you included them, made them meaningful to users. Argue about how these standards are linked to construct validity. Reference quality sources. Your standard A sample response, make sure you include every standard elaboration in your annotations. That's actually really important. Because if you've got 9 standards elaborations in your rubric, and you're not showing me 9 examples of your annotated student response, you've missed one. And you're telling me it's standard A and it's discerning. It means you're actually subconsciously or consciously ignoring one of them. I don't know which one it would be, but it also may be telling me that you don't quite know what that standards elaboration means. You don't know what it looks like in a sample student response. And remember, that's going to affect your reliability when it comes to marking. If you don't know what it means and you can't identify it, how are we going to put a standard against that particular?
Delete it.
Yeah. Do you need it? There you go. Do you need it? Actually, that's a really good point. If you actually write your student sample
And it's not there, delete.
I don't need that there. I'm not assessing students on this side. I can go back to my rubric and delete it. Yeah. Good point. And the rubric, read the rubric you're being assessed on. And that's just your sample template. So we're done. Now, if you want to ask some questions about the assessment, how are people feeling? Do you want me to talk to students individually? Yes? Other than group questions? Any group questions before we go?
I just want to clarify some things. If I remember what they are. First, I remember a few weeks ago you said, because someone asked the questions, all the students have internet at home except for 2, but we're assuming that they still have computers at home. Is that still the case?
What's the design brief?
It just
They
says
don't have internet
most
access,
students
that's
have
it.
internet
Yes,
access at home, but 2 students do not. So it's still assuming that they have computers at home.
Absolutely.
Second one, with the content descriptors, even though it says the following must be defined in assessment task, and descriptors is one of them, we don't need it in the task.
No, because it's embedded in the standards elaborations. And don't forget context, genre, audience and purpose. I've hammered that all the way through. In English, can't do it well without it. I know, look at that.
It's all in the task sheet.
Genre, audience, purpose,
Oh.
context.
But it is important.
It's very important.
Yeah.
It's important to every form of communication. Who are you talking to? And why are you talking to them? What do you hope to achieve?
How detailed do you have to be when you're talking about that? Because you've just got the audience full of readers of so and such. Is that fine? Is that good? Have you got it in there? Cool.
Oh, also, with the scaffolding, if we're making like a graphic organizer for them to do their note taking in, would we include that as part of the task sheet or attach it as an appendix? the assignment? Or do you want us to just kind of ignore it but say that we will do it?
Okay, what you could do is provide students with a scaffold that they will fill in for a draft.
Right.
As part of the task sheet or as an appendix?
As an, well, in, I'm thinking about real world application and comparing that to this. In the real world, you would give students a task sheet, and then when they were about to do their draft or a few weeks before the draft, you give them the scaffold. But
Apparently, like they use, like in the bachelor's degree, they do that because they do a whole unit outline.
yeah,
But I think Jill said in this one we don't have to worry about all that stuff.
you don't have to worry about
Like,
it.
as in
If you
put
want,
it in here.
if you want to show differentiation in terms of your assessment at the draft checkpoint, then I don't mind. It would make sense to give it to students as you give them the task sheet. Really, either or is fine, but you might as well add it to the task sheet. Yeah. Rather than append. In fact, yeah, do it. Mainly because it's easy for me to check the task while they're really close together. Otherwise, I'm scrolling all the way down the page and then back up. So it's easier for me if it's attached right next to the task. That shows deep thinking about differentiation. Okay, any other good questions? Okay, so let's spend some time just circulating.